What was the biggest shock that ever happened in your life that you're willing to talk about? Maybe some of you, now Richard, he's been shocked, man. You're shocked. What's the biggest shock?
Did he run over a train?
That's pretty shocking. I have to admit.
I was in shock, believe me.
I have to admit, Rich, that's pretty much, that's up there. Getting run over by a choo-choo train. I'd have to admit, Rich, that is shocking. Anybody else have a shock? Yes, sir.
In my case, when you're at top, was the sudden unexpected death of my father.
Okay, you come home and you find out Dad is dead.
We woke up in the morning and Dad was gone and found out he died in the street.
Died in the street. I know of a guy that did die around the corner. He was walking in the street and he just keeled over it. They don't know how he died. It was a customer's brother, and it was, he couldn't drive a car because he was drunk. They don't know what caused it. He was found on the road dead. But when it's close, a loved one like that, that's shocking.
Yeah, that's just a kid. I just turned 20. It was 2 days after my birthday.
And you're young, yeah. And then for other kids, it's younger than that.
Yeah.
Anybody else have a shock that they want to? You don't have to share it. Yes, sir.
Biggest shock for me was finding out all the stuff that I learned in my science classes were lies.
Oh, really? Evolution? Is that directly in?
I was major into that.
Oh, you bought it, hook, line. Oh, I got him. He was a fighter. Hey, you took a hook, line, and sinker. Yeah, you have told me that. Yeah. Is it Purdy? Purdy. Pooty. Well, I'll call her Purdy. Those are good friends with her, call her Purdy. You call her Pooty, I'll call her Purdy. Yes, sir.
What he said about religious class.
Oh, yeah.
Religion class.
Yeah, you've discussed that with me.
Nothing but lies in Catholic
That's a
religion
big
class.
shock, yeah, that all that you were taught were lies.
And I'm sorry, but I gotta tell you again. Nothing but lies in the Catholic religion class.
Well, there's got to be a little element of truth there to get you to nibble on that rat poison. You know?
That rat poison tastes good.
Yeah. Who invented shock treatment?
My mother.
No, who invented it? It was invented. Anybody know?
I don't know who invented it.
I heard it on Paul Harvey. I remember, so. I mean, and that is an authority. Well, hey, you know, that would be warm. I would count that as a viable answer, but you're wrong. Pardon?
He invented electricity.
No, he did not invent electricity. It's the guy that invented electricity. Who discovered electricity?
Franklin discovered lightning was electric.
Pardon?
Franklin discovered that lightning was electricity.
Yeah, Ben Franklin developed shock treatment. Ben Franklin. Now, I'm pretty sure I'm right.
But shock treatment wasn't used as a treatment for mental illnesses.
No, that's not true. That's not true. Now, I'm only going from what I remember on Paul Harvey.
Did he send his patients out this flag kite?
Yeah, he sent his patients out flying a kite. Go fly a kite. All right, yeah, go fly a kite. Anyway, no, I think he from there developed not the Leyden jar, but the thing however it develops a lot of static, you know, where you develop a lot of this shockers. And a friend of his had somebody that had just got so bewildered, they couldn't straighten out the neurons or whatever in the brain. And they decided to hook this girl up and gave her a jolt, and it straightened her mind out. Now that's what I heard on Paul Harvey and the rest of the story. Now, could I be wrong? I could be very wrong.
Oh, that could be very right. But, you know, I'm just saying.
What is
as far as
it?
regular.
Oh, I understand. yes, until that time. But we're talking back in 17-something or early 1800s. It was Ben Franklin invented shock treatment. That is our title tonight, shock treatment. The last person I think would have to be woke up or shocked out of their tree would have been Paul. I mean, I know I preached Paul was the greatest Christian that ever walked the face of this earth. And why would he need shock treatment? But he was taken to the third heaven. That's where we're going, 2 Corinthians 12, verses 1 through 5. And why would he have to... And if we were to... of all of us here that have been raised Baptist, in the Baptist church, you've heard preaching on this, what have you been taught why Paul was sent to the third heaven? And you could say, well, how do you know it's Paul? Let's just assume it's Paul. Why did he go there? What was the purpose?
To be taught personally by Jesus Christ.
No, he already was teaching and out there and doing it. No, that's a good guess. We go to Galatians, the beginning of Galatians, about being out in the desert for 3 years. But no, that isn't it. Just where he went to paradise. Yes, sir.
It was to give him grace sufficient to carry him through the troubled times.
Okay, I think that's a good answer, because the right after that's a good answer, is my grace is sufficient. He goes over that, about his infirmities.
His eyes.
And we assume it's his eyes, to give him the grace to get through that. But a lot of us, I shouldn't say a lot of us, there are a lot of Christians that have grave infirmities, and they don't get shock treatment. Is there another, and we can only guess as to why. Is there another reason why he received shock treatment? I mean, a logical reason.
Keep him humble.
To keep him humble, yeah. That kind of appears right in the very first verse. Keep him humble, to rely upon God's grace. I've said, could it be to encourage him to finish the race, to finish the good fight, that this is what's awaiting you on the other side, and encourage him to finish the fight? I mean, that's a logical reason. I'm not saying that's a good biblical reason. I think the two that you gave I could justify it more with the Bible. Any other reason? Or don't we think about these things too much? Don't think about them too much. But Paul received shock treatment. He did. Yeah, we say he was on his donkey, but there's no proof he was on the donkey. But we say that. We do say that. Father, bless our lesson tonight, and may we learn something from it that we could use in our daily walk. Listen, I have 11 or 12 points here. Goes on to the next page. I have 12 points. 10 of them are right out of this. And why don't we take note of these things and apply it to your life? We have all the word the again, all S words tonight too. But in verse 1, it is not expedient. What does the word expedient mean? What does expedient mean?
Good for you.
Good for you or profitable. It is not profitable for me, doubtless, to glory. So I would assume he's in reference to the verses that are before that. He's saying, look at me. Look at how I have suffered for Jesus. I have really, really suffered. It is not expedient for me, doubtless, to glory. So now, I hope I'm outlining this correctly. We want it to be biblical and accurate. The very first S word that I have is, since it's not profitable to be, he was bragging on this. And it is the stopping. The stopping is our first point. Is to stop bragging. He was glorying in how much he had suffered for Jesus in the previous verses here, of how many times he was beaten, how many stripes he had taken, How much of, are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israel? So am I. Are they the seed of Abraham? So am I. And he's bragging. And he's saying, what profit is there in this? It's not profitable. It's not good to be doing this glorying. And so I guess if we were to take just one thing away from this, you had said that he was made to be, to teach him to be humble. That is one thing that all of us need to be reminded of. This is even before he gets talking about the shock treatment. We need to be reminded that we need to be humble. To be humble. So all of us here are pretty much an expert in some field, whatever that field may be, in the experiences that you have. But you don't have to go around bragging about it and displaying it for all of one to see. And so the idea here is just flat out stop it. Now, you know if you're guilty of that. Now, I'm not saying everybody here is guilty of it. You could be tempted to do it. You could be guilty to do it. The idea is if you're tempted to do it, just don't even get started. I know you're tired back there. Don't even get started. And if you are doing it, stop it. Stop doing it. Just don't do it. I will come, our second point, I will come to visions and revelations of the Lord. So he's talking about stopping one thing and starting another. I will come to visions and revelations of the Lord. So he's going to start doing something else here. And it's always a good thing, instead of glorying in yourself, to glory in the Lord. And I remember we were fishing once. It was the ones that went, I can't think of their name right now. They had one girl, not Valerie, Victoria. The Delahays. No, not the Schneiders. The Delahays. And what was their name? Joe and Kathy Delahaye. They had come fishing, and they were on the boat. We went out as the church. We rented a boat and went fishing, perch fishing, and Victoria was in the boat, and they caught this sheephead. Now, if you're a fisherman, do you want to catch a sheephead? Do you want to catch a sheephead? Oh, well, that didn't pick up on the tape. So, well, it depends, yeah. But they caught this humongous sheephead. And as a general rule, you don't want to catch that. But they brought it up, and all the fishermen, these fishermen are on board. I mean, the captain's there, the first mate's there. And Joe says, "Oh, glory to God! Look at the big, beautiful fish we caught." Not knowing what he got. I mean, he got like it would be considered a boot or a carp. I mean, you hope it doesn't get on your line. But they were just thrilled, tickled pink. And it's a nice fish, you know. And we took it off and threw it back. But I remember distinctly, both he and Victoria gave glory to God for that they caught this big sheep. You know, it's fun to catch a big sheephead. But they didn't realize how much of a garbage fish they did catch. But he gave glory to God right away for it. I was really impressed. Wow, glory to God, look what we got. So we need to stop bragging. And they weren't bragging on what they caught. They were bragging on the Lord and what the Lord caught for them, you know. Glory to God. We need to start bragging on Jesus and making that a habit of ours. He then goes on to say, I'm going to come to visions and revelations of the Lord. And he starts talking about this man in Christ about 14 years ago. Now, we assume it's Paul, that he's talking in the third person about himself, because he didn't know if he was in the body or out of the body. You know, anybody here know people that have out-of-body experiences? Personally know them. I had a guy work for me. He would claim he'd have out-of-body experiences. I thought he was on drugs. And he'd have these out-of-body experiences. But if you had this experience that Paul had, do you think you would tell somebody? If you had that experience, would you go tell somebody?
Depends on who I was telling.
Now you say you wouldn't. Is there any particular reason? I think people would be tempted to tell. Any particular? You don't have to say why.
Nobody would believe.
You would just keep it a secret.
Everybody's thinking crazy.
Depends on who you're telling.
They lock you up in a rubber room.
Well, I don't know. Amongst other Christians, though, Paul.
They would say no. If there's
Well, you think that's his motive. I don't know what his motive is, but you're guessing that is his motive. That could be the motive. That could be the stopping, the starting, and the third point here in verse 2 is the secrets. Paul just didn't go around telling everybody. And he didn't tell them the day it happened or the day after it happened. Now, when they saw the transfigured Jesus, what did the Lord command them to do? Until
The resurrection.
till the resurrection. Then they were permitted to tell. Did they keep? They kept that. And the leakers that are in politics, they leak out the information. They're not supposed to tell this stuff. Is it a crime to tell these things? They do find them. They've got people in not CIA, but in the Department of Justice under arrest right now for disclosing things that they are not supposed to tell. You're not supposed to leak out this information, and they do price set traps and they catch these people. But the secrets, folks, you don't have to or necessarily tell everybody everything. There are things in your life you do not have to tell. You don't have to tell me. You don't have to tell somebody else. And if it's sin and you got to just unload it, who should you tell? You tell the Lord and only the Lord, because He's not going to go around and whisper it around to anybody else. Now, this was not sin on Paul's part, but it happened to him. And whatever his motive for not telling, he didn't tell. And he waits. It says, I knew a man above 14 years ago. Now, if you could go back 14 years, because my Bible says this is happening in 60 AD. We're back in, 46 AD? No, 46 AD is about when this happens. About when this incident happens. So keep that date in your mind. About 46 AD, 14 years earlier, before 60 AD, when this happened. I mean, he just didn't go around and tell about it. He didn't write about it. But this was the proper time in which to tell about it. He did not go and tell everybody. I mean, folks, the flapdoodling on the bragging needs to stop, and the flapdoodling on all the secrets just need to stop. It's unimportant, doesn't need to be said, and nobody needs to know about it. And this is a big event, folks, that happened in Paul's life, and he does not go around talking about it. He just, and it's only recorded here. He does not go about talking about it. And then it says that in this experience, this shock treatment that he received, he didn't know if he was in the body or out of the body. How does a person tell whether or not they're, what did they do to make sure? I had to make sure I was awake. What did they do? I just had to make sure, was I even awake? Yeah, they pinch themselves to make sure, boy, am I awake? They pinch themselves to make sure that I'm not dreaming. So he couldn't tell whether or not he was in his body or whether he was out of body, showing it is the spirit. Folks, this is the spiritual world that church really is. This is the spiritual world. Yeah, I know we're in a physical body, but we're dealing with the Holy Spirit and the demonic spirits that are out there, but in the body or out of the body, and he doesn't know of what to believe or what not to believe, what is happening. In verses 3 and 4, and he knew a man whether out of the body, I cannot tell it. God knoweth. How that he was caught up into paradise and heard. In other words, he could hear things. So not only was he in the spirit, and he didn't know whether he was in the body or out of the body, but the senses were acting. Our fifth point is the senses, just like the rich man in hell. He could feel the flames. He could see the other side. He could see the flames. He could hear the cry. He could hear his cries, and he could hear. He was in Abram's bosom. Lazarus was in Abram, the beggar was in. Lazarus was in Abram's bosom, and he could hear him say, "We can't come to you, and you can't come here, and I can't go over on that." You could hear, see, taste, and touch, folks. The senses. It's just like the rich man in hell. When you have this shock treatment in your life. And then in verse 4 is the actual shock that takes place. How that he was caught up into paradise. Now, if you were in paradise, now we know that paradise is not down there, but paradise is up there. So what do you think paradise was like? If you were to guess, what was so shocking? What was so shocking? If you were caught up there. The absolute purity of God, you said? Okay, the absolute purity of God, that's one thing. What else would be shocking? Or are you in the body right now or out of the body? I cannot tell. What would be shocking to you up there? Everything? Give me one. What are you expecting? To see Christ, to visually see Jesus. Give me another. My mother said that she went there one time, and that her mother said it, and she met her mother and said it's not yet, we need to go back. Something about her mother saying that. Now I don't necessarily believe that. I think you'd meet Jesus, but who am I to say? All right, to meet Christ, give me another one. A street of gold? Come on. A street of gold? To see all the Christians that went on before. Ben? To see those that went on before? Anybody else got anything that you hope to see? Huh?
Pearly gates.
The pearly gates?
Got a friend of mine, he don't believe in it. He knows it.
Well, he'll believe in a lot of things after death. The pearly gates? Give me another one.
He was like, yeah, I can't wait to see the old pearly gates.
The pearly gates? Well, he can mock it all he wants, but the mocking one day will end. The pearly gates, the angels, the angelic beings, the four beasts, singing holy, holy, holy.
Is the tree of life there?
The tree of life, the river of life. Well, all kinds of things. All right? The senses, the shock of what he... But look at verse 4. How that he was caught up into paradise. What was shocking? And he heard unspeakable words, which is not lawful for a man to utter. So what's the thing that shocked him? Not what he saw.
What he heard.
Yeah. I don't know. I've never seen anybody bring that out before. What was shocking wasn't what he saw, but what he heard. What did he hear? I have no idea. I have no idea what he heard. Who knows what he heard? Maybe Paul didn't even know. It was unspeakable words. Maybe it was in a language he couldn't understand. The other day, Corey said something in Spanish. I don't even know what she said. She went, blah, blah, blah. And we were just laughing because she said it so fast. I don't know how they talk that fast. And it was like, I don't know what she was telling Esther to do. What were you telling Esther to do? Do you remember? Huh? No, what were you telling her to do?
Just say moo like a cow.
Oh, to say moo like a cow. That's what it was. Say moo like a cow. Well, say it loud and in Spanish. Real fast.
Como dice la boca?
Now say it again real fast so we can all get it. Go ahead.
Como dice la boca?
You got that? Now, I couldn't say that in a million years. That's to say moo like a cow. Just blah, blah, blah. I don't know, but now that would be unspeakable words for me. The shock, but it's not what he saw, but what he heard. Now I would assume the shock of what he saw was shocking too. I'm not discounting that. But what does the Bible say? Exactly, it says unspeakable words of what he heard. It wasn't necessarily what he saw, but what he heard was the very shock of it. And it must have been stunning. It's like, yeah, that's another S word we could use. The shock of it all. Now, Richard said that he had a shock when he got run over by a train. Now, folks, that would be shocking. Shocking. Waking up in the morning, finding out your father's dead. That would be shocking. Things like that are shocking. But folks, none of those are as shocking as what Paul had. That shocked him out of his socks. The shock of it all. Verses 4 and 5 again. How that he was caught up into paradise and heard unspeakable words, which is not lawful for man to utter. Of such a one will I glory. Yet on myself I will not glory, but in my infirmities. So in 1 Corinthians 2, verse 9, if we go back there, to kind of justify other than what we heard, and it does say ear heard in 1 Corinthians 2:9, but as it is written, eye hath not seen nor ear heard, neither have entered in the heart of man the things which God hath prepared for them that love him. So no eye hath seen nor ear heard all these great and shocking things that he has prepared for us. No man. But how can we know? How can we know some of the things that we will see up there? How can we know it? That's right. If you read read the next verse, verse 10. If we read the next verse in verse 10, it says, "But God hath revealed them unto us by his Spirit. For the Spirit searcheth all things, yea, the deep things of God." So whatever the Spirit has revealed to you and I in this Bible is something that we will expect to be able to see, expect to be able to hear. And some of the things that we will be able to see is the street of gold, the angels, the saints that went on before us, a mansion, the mansions that are on the other side, the river of life, the New Jerusalem, and the sea of glass. And we can visualize those things, but we haven't literally seen it, but we have heard it, and we can, with our feeble mind, try to understand what it says here, is the shock. And so this point, the seventh point, is the showing. How is he going to show this to us? He shows the showing of it, as we can get Paul writes about it in the chapter of charity, what we call the chapter of love, that he sees through a glass darkly, and then, but one day face to face, right? So we look through this glass darkly here. We get a little bit of a haze of what could be on the other side awaiting us, but we don't really see the crystal clear until we're really there. The showing of it. How long was he there? I mean, if you're going to get a shock, the shock of your life, how long does it take to get the shock of your life? 2 seconds? That's a good guess. I mean, if you went to Auschwitz, man, you could have been there 4 or 5 years. If you went to where do they send them in Russia? Siberia, down to the gulags, you could be there for 10 years or die there. You get all kinds of shocks, and it's a lot longer than 2 seconds. How long was there? 2 seconds? Do I hear any other amount of time? Was he there 10 minutes? Was he there an hour? How long was he there? We don't know. But we know he was there 14 years ago. So what was the date? If this is 60 AD, you take 14 years, he says about. Doesn't he say about? above 14 years ago. So what is that, 46 AD? Go back then to Acts 14. Acts 14. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. Acts 14, verses 19 and 20. In Acts 14, I have 45 AD. So how many years is that prior to that? 15 years. There it is. He said above 14 years ago. All right? So the assumption of when this takes place by all the commentaries and all the those that write about this, verses 19 and 20. And there came thither certain Jews from Antioch and Iconium who persuaded the people, and having stoned Paul, drew him out of the city, supposing he had been dead. Howbeit, as the disciples stood round about him, he rose up and came into the city, and the next day he departed with Barnabas to Derbe. The claim is this is when Paul went to the third heaven and went to paradise. And so it shows that he had gotten stoned to death. The assumption is he didn't know whether he left his body or he was in the body or the spirit, but he was up there in paradise, and he sees this displays and the hearing of the words of the unspeakable words. And then next thing he knew, he was back in his body, and he rises up and goes back into the city. So I guess our 8th point is the shortness of this shock that takes place. Like I said, Ben Franklin developed shock treatment and gave the girl a jolt. Now, I don't know, is it 1 jolt, 2, 10 jolts? I don't know what he gave her. But whatever was mixed up in there, it straightened it out, and it worked. It worked, and that's how it was developed. And after service, if you want to Google it, go find out if there's any truth to that. But the shortness of when a shock really comes upon you, Richard, yeah, a real shock, the shortness, in other words, it comes right then at that moment, the shock of it. The shock. In Jude, verse 20. Now let's start talking about the motives for this. In verse 20 it says, "But ye, beloved, building up yourselves on your most holy faith." We're to be built up. If you received in this building up, I mean, it's like exercising, you know. Folks, I'm never going to be 18, 19 years old again. So I stopped doing pull-ups, push-ups. You know, it's everything I can do just to get up in the morning. Right? Building yourself up. But we're to build ourselves up spiritually. When Paul had gotten this shock treatment, we assume it didn't tear him down, but it built him up and made him stronger. The strengthening of Paul. It made him a stronger Christian. A stronger Christian. It's all right. I'm just moseying on over. It made him a stronger Christian. Stronger than he was in a short period of time, whether or not he was there for 2 seconds, 10 minutes, an hour, however long it took for the other disciples to come around him and surround him before he regained consciousness there. the strengthening of him. Now, prior to this, when persecution came to Paul, and I've kind of brought this up in Acts 17 when we were doing this. Prior to this, whenever persecution happened, what did Paul do? Anybody recall what Paul would do? He would skedaddle out of there. He would you know, as when a deer runs away, we call that hightailing, don't we? And their tail flips up. I don't know why they do that. It's got to be some natural thing for them to do to distract. Warn other deer? Is that the theory? It warns other deer, and he skedaddles out of there. He headed out of there, man. I hear my mother calling, and off he would run. Would you? We don't expect, and we don't think of Paul ever as being a coward. But when and I'm not saying he was, but in Acts 17. In Acts 16, when he leaves, when the persecution comes, he is the others that are about them make the arrangements for him to go. He doesn't go on his own accord. He's like, Paul, you know you need to get out of here. So, all right, I'll leave. He then leaves. All those other events, he goes. He goes, but it's not like he's running away. He has been, here's the tickets, Paul. Get on the ship and get out of here. Go to Athens. It wasn't that he fled to Athens. Then he said, all right, it'd probably be better for everybody if I leave. And he stopped running. Notice what he does in our 10th point, our last point that is really, I would call biblical. The shock treatment that he received caused a sudden change, the suddenness of, in other words, this isn't something that add to your faith virtue, knowledge, goodness, mercy, and so on, and add this stuff as you build. When you received shock treatment, something immediately happened, the suddenness of the change, that he turns on a dime and there's a great change in his life right now. And one reason why he could have been sent there in this this suddenness in the change of his behavior is the place where he was stoned. He rises up. Supposing he had been dead, howbeit the disciples stood round about him, he rose up and came into the city. He went right back into the place where they went and persecuted and killed him. So there was a suddenness in the change of his behavior. Now, we already know Paul is already saved. But when a person gets saved, that when something happens in their life, there's a suddenness, there's an immediate change in the attitude of people. When a boy meets a girl, there can be a sudden change. When the girl meets the boy, a sudden change in the attitude. In other words, they wake up and they realize the sun is shining. And they take note of these things. There's sudden things that happen in your life that changes a person right now suddenly. And this shock treatment changed Paul immediately. Immediately he stopped fleeing and he went right to where, some say, well, he wanted to get to the other side. And he made every effort to get back there. We can bring that up in our next point. But he went from fleeing to seeking persecution almost. As it almost appears that way. But there was a suddenness in the change of his attitude and the things that he did. And we say, well, Paul was the greatest Christian that ever walked. Well, even the greatest Christian that ever walked needed that. And to say that we don't need that, come on, we need that too. And there's nothing wrong with you and I getting some shock treatment in our life to change us forever for the glory of God, the suddenness of this in our life. Now, Paul says, for me to die is what? Gain. But for me to live, but
To live is Christ, to die is gain.
To live is Christ and to die is gain. But it is more needful. Let's just get there. Let me get there to Philippians. I'll turn to Philippians chapter 1. For to me to live is Christ. All right, if he's going to be alive, he's going to live for the Lord. But to die is gain, and I'm going to get back on that other side. But if I live in the flesh, this is the fruit of my labor. Yet what I shall choose, I wot not. I know not which to choose. For I am in a strait between two, having a desire to depart, to be with Christ, which is far better. Now this is 4 years after he tells this story. Nevertheless, to abide in the flesh is more needful for you. So it was more important for him to say, as far as the door opening up for him again to get onto the other side is the shutting of it, the shutting of that door. He just couldn't go. He's going to go when he's called, not when he wants to go. And he knows it was more needful and more value for the sake and the cause of Christ for him to stay back. For him to stay back. The shutting of that door and getting back the shock treatment. Now, our last point in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. Now, we came up with some good reasons, biblical reasons, as to why God shocked him, to humble him, to give him the grace to go through his infirmity, whatever it was. Our last point is this. Don't be surprised if a shock does come. This should stir us, the stirring of us. That these things are written down here for our admonition. Folks, this story just isn't in here just for a story. These stories are in here for our benefit and for our admonition. And all of us here probably need a good shock or two along the way. When a person gets saved, their attitude should immediately change. They do an about face, and they do an about... I was never in the Army, so I don't know how you do an about face. There's probably a way you pivot to turn around. You do this about face. But every once in a while, we're wandering off in the wrong direction, and then God has to give us a shock to turn us around and get us going again for Him in the right way. Shake hands before leaving.